Hey, it's Sean from the Commander's Brew. Henzie Toolbox Tori. We're going artifact creatures, and we're hoping to get the blitz cost cheap enough that we can cast a bunch of them for free. I'm all about cool deck ideas, helping you brew. I've got some cool finds for you veteran brewers out there, and for you newer brewers, you can get a peek in the process that I use. I'm not going to give you a deck. I'm going to teach you to deck. And now a bit of business. I promise I'll be really quick with this. A like and a subscribe goes a really long way. I'd really appreciate it. You can check out the cards I talk about in the TCG player link below. Buy stuff through there, it helps us out. Or help out more directly at patreon.com/commandersbrew. Find out how to get in on the Discord and on these cool group brewing sessions. And for my fellow Canadian viewers, I've got a coupon code for you from the Wizards Tower, wizardtower.com. Let's hear one fake ad and one real ad. Do you want to earn some extra income? Do so as a delivery driver for Darksteel Deliveries. Just sign up for our 7-week certification course on how to drive Darksteel vehicles, and you can make your own hours and be your own boss. Minimum 48 hours per week, you still have other bosses, and you get to go to the bathroom in a bottle. And now the real ad from the Wizards Tower. wizardtower.com, your place for strategy articles and deck techs. And if you're viewing from Canada, you can use coupon code BREWUNITED to get 5% off your Magic singles, if you spend $20 or more. Now, back to the show. Let's take a look at Henzie and how he fits in with our goal. 3 mana for a 3/3. The casting cost is key here. I want to start by looking at Henzie's second ability. Blitz costs are cheaper for every time we've cast him from the command zone. That's key. We can't just bounce him to the hand and bring him back down. I already thought of that. Can't do it. So we're going to load up with useful artifact creatures starting at 4 mana value if possible. We're going to make creatures cheaper to cast, and if we can get them 4 cheaper, that means we're casting these 4 mana artifacts for free. And if we fall a little bit short of our goal, casting them for super cheap's also good. And then let's get blitzing. We'll dump out a bunch of artifact creatures for no mana cost, and then we'll refill the hand as we sack them all at the end step. It's kind of like a wheel, but just for yourself. So I think the first place I want to look is artifact creatures. Let's find some that cost 4 or more. There's actually quite a few, and a lot of them have some good stapley effects tied onto them. Stapled onto them, I guess. It doesn't get much more stapley than Solemn Simulacrum. Even if you think this card has fallen a little bit out of favor, being able to give this blitz means you're tutoring up a land and sacking it to draw 2 cards right away. Golden Guardian is interesting. It has Defender, so we can't really attack with it, but that doesn't matter. We can spend the 2 to even fight Henzie to kill him one more time to recast him, because one way or another, Golden Guardian will die at the end of turn from Blitz, and it'll turn into Gold Forge Garrison. And if we can end up blitzing things for free, we should have some mana left over to make a few golems. Speaking of golems, Meteor Golem, simple. Blitz it in, destroy a thing. Blade Griff prototype is really neat because we got haste. We can blitz this thing in when we definitely have someone who can't block it. And it's a little political too. Treasure Keeper's cool because we get something else on the battlefield after this thing gets sacrificed to blitz. Now it's really important that Treasure Keeper brings something else to the battlefield. Hopefully a creature, because I'm sure you're aware if we sack all of our creatures after we blitz them, our board's going to stay empty. So we need creatures that actually bring other creatures, not just in token form. Clone Shell's really fun. It is possible we'll whiff and we won't have a creature under there, but most likely when this thing dies, we'll get that draw from Blitz and have another creature on the battlefield. Summoner's Egg, basically the same thing, except we're not going to do any damage with this thing. Precursor Golem seems fun because the main golem will die so that the other golems aren't vulnerable to this effect. We'll just have 2 3/3 golems left over. Speaking of leftover 3/3 golems, Phyrexian Triniform. Hefty cost up front, but we will get a lot of golems when this thing's done, including our card from Blitz, and we might be able to encore this to get a whole bunch more tokens. Mishra's Self-Replicator doesn't bring in tokens or extra creatures on its own, but since most of the deck is historic spells, that's not a huge mana investment to keep making a bunch more 2/2s. We probably don't want to blitz this one though. Or heck, we blitz the first one and cast another one to make a copy, and then that copy can make more copies. We don't need the first one. And it's not an artifact creature, but Cauldron of Souls is a great way to ensure that after we sacrifice these creatures to blitz, they'll come back with a -1/-1 counter on it. We still get the card draw, and we've got a bit of a board left over. Kodama of the East Tree gets a special mention as a non-artifact creature because just being able to freely put extra creatures on the battlefield is amazing. And ideally, if we're drawing a few cards every turn from all the blitz things being sacrificed, we should have eligible targets to put down for free. Another factor of attacking with all these creatures, I guess we don't technically have to attack with them. We can't in some cases. But so far we're just talking about spinning wheels here. Let's look at some artifacts that hit hard. Traxos will enter the battlefield tapped, but I suspect if we can blitz something else in right away, we'll be able to untap it. It's got that haste. We've got 7 trample damage coming in. Scuttling Doom Engine can't be easily chumped, and whether it gets in for 6 or it dies, it's still doing 6 to somebody. And if they don't block it, We do 6 from the first hit, and then another 6 when it dies. Shrine Steward doesn't seem fancy on its own. This thing isn't going to do a ton of damage, but its ability to get an aura card, namely Rancor, means this will fuel future artifact creatures to do a lot more damage. Giving things trample is huge, and this keeps coming back to our hand after the things we've casted on that have blitz have died. Soul of New Phyrexia blitzes in for a 6/6 trampler. Giving everything indestructible doesn't matter a ton while we're blitzing this in, but it lives in the graveyard. There might be a situation where we'll want to hold up the mana to execute this. Maybe once Henzie's going strong, especially if we're not paying for artifact creatures at that point, we should be able to hold it up. I am interested in looking at ways to augment these artifact creatures' power. If I have to blitz in a 2/2, I want it to do some damage. And I found a pretty cool cycle of cards from Amonkhet to talk about. Rornus' Monument off the top is an easy way to ensure we're doing extra damage. Every creature we blitzes in gets a +2/+2 in trample. That makes some of the smaller ones actual threats. Plus, if it's green, the blitz cost is already 1 less. Bantu's Monument does the same thing, but it gives us a drain and gain every time we blitz something in. And Hazoret completes the gen colors by letting us discard and draw a card every time we do so. I can see this being really useful later in our game plan once we don't need lands that much anymore. The creature reduction doesn't do a lot since most of our creatures are colorless, so for that reason I don't mind running Oketra's Monument. We've got some Sac Outlets. We're planning on sacrificing things, so I don't mind having an army of 1/1s to do so. And then the neat thing is if you search for monuments on Scraffle, you also find Forsaken Monument, which fits nicely. Most of our team gets +2/+2, and we'll be gaining a bunch of life while we play. That's another way to keep us alive while we're getting our engine built up. Let's talk cost reductions. Making creatures cheaper isn't just important for Henzie to get more casts so we can get blitz costs for cheaper. Sometimes we'll just want to cast them regularly for cheap or free. Since the bulk of our deck is artifact creatures, Foundry and Spectre does a very nice job. Can't blitz it though. Jora's Familiar works on all artifacts because they're historic, and the occasional legendary creature we fit in here that does have a color. We could blitz this one, but we probably don't want to. Ugin the Ineffable is a whopping 2 discount on all our colorless creatures. This plus Henzie's first cast means we're blitzing artifact creatures that cost 4 for a single mana. Plus we get extra bodies on the board, and more draw, and a destruction spell. Cloud Key's a very nice card, and it did come down in price since it was printed with the list. Wizards thinks we're going to choose creature, obviously, but we might choose artifact. It works on most of the deck. Not Henzie though. Nylea Keen-Eyed also makes creatures 1 less to cast. We might want to blitz this. It's a pretty big attacker, if the devotion makes sense. Semblance Anvil is probably the MVP for discounts. If we imprint an artifact creature, we get credit for artifact, and we get credit for creature. This effectively makes 90% of our deck 2 less to cast. I haven't done the math. I don't know how many instants or sorceries are in there. And Myth Unbound seems tempting. I am hoping to cast Henzie a few times, so being able to do so for only 1 additional mana does make sense. But we don't really need to rely on that card draw. And if we have enough redundancy, maybe it's better to just run something that makes creatures cheaper in general. The next category of cards I want to talk about are Sac Outlets. The great thing about Blitz is that when we sacrifice the creature, we get to draw that card. But drawing the card isn't tied to the Blitz ability. If a Blitz creature is going to die anyway, we might as well sack it for some value. I mean, we still get that card draw either way, right? Trading Post does a lot, and it only costs 1 to sack one of these artifact creatures to draw an additional card. And if we've got something good in our graveyard, we can sack that creature to return it to our hand instead, as long as it's an artifact creature. Birthing Pod is a really nice one because we can sort of tutor up stuff of higher mana values. We've got some pretty spicy heavy hitters, and I don't mind walking up the chain to grab them. It is only at sorcery though, so if things are going to die in combat, we don't get to use it. But that's where Evolutionary Leap comes in. Is this better than Birthing Pod? We can pay a green to sack the creature that was already about to die anyway, and although we don't get choice of what card we get, we're definitely getting something. Attrition is pricey, but it's powerful. It's $10, but again, 1 mana to destroy a non-black creature, I'll take it. And of course, there's a whole bunch of instants and sorceries that let us sacrifice creatures to draw some cards. Life's Legacy lets us potentially draw a whole bunch of cards. And Deadly Dispute is a favorite because we get that treasure back. It effectively cost a single black mana to do so. While I was looking for ways to sacrifice creatures, I found a ton of creatures that ask you to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of your end step. If something asks you to sacrifice a creature at the beginning of the end step, we get to stack the Blitz trigger and that trigger so that we can sack it to the other thing before the Blitz sacrifice gets it. So Braid's Arisen Nightmare works the way we want it to. We sack that creature, and then each opponent has to sack something. The fact that we're sacrificing an artifact creature most of the time means our opponents do get to choose whether or not they sacrifice a creature or an artifact. I don't like giving my opponents a lot of choice, but we do get the upside that if our opponents don't have creatures, they have to do an artifact, and vice versa. They can't get out of it if they just have one of those types. Dreadfeast Demon, although expensive to cast, does the best thing for us. I will happily turn those other artifact creatures into a bunch of 6/6 demons. And Feed the Pack kind of goes wide. Now we're sacking these creatures and we're putting a ton of wolves out of the battlefield. Zeatora from the same block that Henzie comes from, a little bit of a fling to do extra damage to players. So if they let those blitzed creatures through, they kind of get hit by them twice. Or we can use it to pick off annoying creatures, not to mention the 3 treasure tokens. And then Industrial Advancement came from the commander decks from New Capenna. Same deal, we get to sacrifice the creature to this before the blitz kicks in. And since the mana value has to be 4 or greater, it's kind of like Super Clone Shell. Henzie's a 3-color card. Jund, Riveteers, whatever. I want to make sure I look through specifically 3-color cards to see if anything works out well for us. And I'm going to focus in the set Henzie came from, including the commander decks. I have a feeling there's a few cards they planted in there that are just perfect for Henzie. It's really common for them to hide other cool effects that go with these commanders. Riveteers Ascendancy seems perfect for Henzie. It only works once per turn, and the bulk of our creatures are 4 mana value, but we have plenty of 5s or greater to return those 4s. Ognis the Dragon's Lash seems like the perfect right-hand commander to Henzie, because now we'll be making a treasure with every creature we blitz and attack with. 1 treasure per creature is sort of another way of getting all your creatures to cost 1 less. This way, if we're just 1 mana short of casting a creature for free and chain everything together, Ognis puts us over the top. And then out of curiosity, I looked up Jund cards in general. Dragon Appeasement seems neat. We have to skip our draw step, which sucks, but it turns all our blitzes into double draws. At the risk of filling our deck up with non-artifact things, we're still an Artifacts Matters deck at heart. Although we can't blitz in Mirror Retriever, we're getting something back from the graveyard when it dies, and we've got plenty of Sac Outlets to make that happen. Junk Diver basically does the same thing. And then Scrab Trawler is especially interesting because we can keep getting things back out of the graveyard and loop them. Now I know I said most of our stuff starts at 4 mana value, but here's a fun little chain that I like to include. If we're about to lose a 4 mana artifact creature to blitz, we can sack our Commander's Sphere to draw a card so that this is in the graveyard to get returned to us. And if Commander's Sphere is about to go, maybe we want to put in Wedding Invitation. We're drawing a card when it comes back down. I don't think we have any vampires, but I would like a few of these creatures to not be able to be blocked. We're hoping to do a lot of damage after all. And then this thing can sacrifice to get back a Soul Guide Lantern, another option to draw a card, but also exiling other people's graveyards. Useful to have. And if we've got enough artifact discounts, we can run that chain over and over. And with all that sacrificing, we gotta put in a Mayhem Devil. Flinging a ton of damage around is pretty nice. You don't need me to tell you that. And when it comes to Artifact Matters, I love Marionette Master. We probably want to put the counters on this thing to make its power 4. And between all the treasures and all the blitzing, it doesn't take much for us to eliminate a player entirely. I like to leave it up to you, dear viewer, to handle your own ramp and removal. Everybody's budget's all over the place, so I don't know what you want to spend. I don't know what you already have. I don't know your meta. I think we can probably spare a little bit of draw because Henzie is a draw engine in the command zone. But already this deck's looking pretty thick. I'll let you decide how much room you have for some other cool effects, like these ones. I mean, a core part of the deck is creatures coming into play and then sacrificing themselves, so what can we do with that? Impact Tremors is a nice enchantment that ensures we'll do 1 damage to each opponent every time we blitz something. And remember, if we can blitz a bunch of things per turn, that'll add up. Or Warstorm Surge, Impact Tremors big buddy. If we can get this down, we'll probably eliminate a player in 1 turn cycle. And Stalking Vengeance is an even bigger brother in the deck. Only this time when the creatures leave, we do damage equal to their power. Now, these next 2 aren't my style, but they're powerful. Grave Pact and Dictate of Erebos. These 2 cards come with a little bit of salt. They touch into the category where it doesn't really let your opponents play their game. People don't always like that. But if you got a powerful meta and people don't mind, all this blitzing means there won't be any opposing creatures on the board for long. And just as a little bit of backup, Mahadi Emporium Master, we get a flood of treasures at our end step for all the creatures we blitzed. We can stack the triggers so we get the treasures after the creatures have left. Jury Master of the Review is just a nice creature, comes down early, probably gets huge, and it's another way to fling a bunch of damage somewhere. And I want to take a second and highlight a couple of Warhammer cards. Man, they gave us some powerful effects in those commander decks. Sluppity Bilepiper. Are you for real with this name? In theory, if we can get our artifact creatures free to cast, we can blitz 1 in for free, then we can pay 2 with the Bilepiper to sack it. Now the next blitz creature, which we might cast for free also, has Cascade. And then Cryptek has a miniature little Cauldron of Souls effect. Again, we have to pay for it, but this is a great way to ensure that one of these creatures that's headed to the graveyard anyway comes back so we can keep using it. Henzie, Seems pretty neat, and there's even more ways you could go. Put in a few aristocrat type of creatures so that you're draining while all this is happening. That could be an alternate win con. Or maybe you focus more on a construct tribal effect. Quite a few artifact creatures are constructs. And then we get the benefit of these tribal cards that give your whole team bigger power and toughness or let you cast them cheaper. Let me know which particular flavor you'd like to go with, Henzie. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I appreciate it. And I'd like to say, you keep being you. The world's a better place for it. See you next time. Oh, and if you're a fan of Jund decks in general, and you also like sacrificing things, check out another deck from this channel, Zeator's 40s. The game plan there is to eliminate players with a single gigantic fling from Zeatora, building the creatures up with tons of power, or maybe a damage doubler or two. I think it's a pretty fun one.